the four classic core beliefs in the field of sex addiction are applicable here. They are, I'm a bad and worthless person. No, that's number one. Number two, no one will love me as I am. If you knew me, in other words, you'd hate me and leave me. Number three, no one takes care of my needs but me. Just stop with those three for the moment, and you'll see inherent in those three is a profound intimacy disorder, so that if I truly have the core belief that if you really knew me, you'd hate me and leave me, then that's going to produce lots of lies, lots of deception. I'm not going to tell you what I'm really doing, I'm not going to tell you what I'm really thinking, because my belief is that if you knew all of that stuff, you'd hate me and leave me. And there's a profound anxiety to intimacy disorder. There's in a way, a fear of honesty in relationship, because you just don't have that sense of trust developed that you can screw up and make mistakes and someone else will still love you.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. I'm Randy Everett, your co-host, and today we'd like to offer you a legacy episode featuring Dr. Mark Laaser. Today, Mark and I will be talking about the Healthy Sexuality series, and today's episode is Relational Dimensions. Here now is Dr. Mark Laaser and the Faithful and True podcast.
And we're excited today to get back to the study on healthy sexuality that you and I began a number of weeks ago. We've been interrupted mainly just through timing. We had our friend Dustin Daniels visit us from Arizona, and that led to 2 back-to-back shows with Dustin. Right. And then, of course, with you teaching, that brought in Greg. So we're happy to return our listeners to our discussion of healthy sexuality, with today's unit being on the relational dimension.
We are exploring a model that was created a number of years ago to create greater understanding about the whole concept of healthy sexuality. And I believe that it's imperative for all of us to understand healthy sexuality so that we're not just teaching the negatives, about sex. In other words, here's what you don't do. I think most of us grew up with the don'ts, and we're trying to talk about some of the healthy things that we can do in order to make ourselves more available to healthy sexuality in marriage.
Well, and some of the feedback that we have received following the first 2 shows that we did on the subject resulted in people asking, is there a resource that we can actually be referencing to follow along with this? And the fact of the matter is, yes. The Faithful and True workbook that you just referenced, that you wrote a number of years ago, is a fantastic resource for anyone that is looking for the actual manual to be able to follow along.
That's right. So in some ways, for those groups or individuals out there that might be listening and are familiar with that workbook or have known about it for years, or maybe want to get one or order one from us, it is kind of a systematic, kind of a Bible study-oriented guide to the topics that we're covering here.
Well, and the particular unit on relational dimension that we're starting today opens with a story that I'd like to start today's show by sharing. It's called Jonathan's Story. Jonathan was lonely. He'd been lonely most of his life. When he was young, his parents rewarded him when he acted like an adult, but they didn't really listen to him. Neither his mother nor dad talked to him about emotional or spiritual issues. They didn't encourage Jonathan to play or make friends. Since his dad worked long hours, Jonathan's mom enjoyed having Jonathan around and treated him like the man of the house. When his dad was home, he didn't have much time for Jonathan. Mom was busy with all of her activities, and so Jonathan was left to spend much of his time on his own. Jonathan went on to marry his high school sweetheart, Mary. They had known each other for years. Jonathan and Mary had 3 children, and gradually both of them got busy with work, church, and the children's activities. They didn't have much time to talk or go out together. One night, as Jonathan was flipping through the TV channels after Mary had gone to bed, an attractive and seductive-looking woman appeared on the screen. "Do you need a friend tonight? Are you lonely? Call me," she said. He quickly changed the TV channel. Over the next several days, however, her image kept reoccurring in his mind. He had never called one of those numbers before, and he wondered what it would be like. Jonathan knew he shouldn't, but something powerful, lonely, and deep inside of him yearned just to hear the sound of her voice. The appeal of the woman on TV was not so much about lust as a deep longing for companionship. Jonathan needs to know how to be emotionally and spiritually intimate.
Yeah, and I was just thinking that's a bit of an older example in terms of 800 and 900 numbers that started appearing on late night television a number of years ago, but and they're still out there, as well as lots of advertisements like that these days on the internet. I think it's also important for us to say, just by way of introduction, in terms of including any story like that, what is the proverbial saying? The names have been changed to protect the innocent. And,
yes, this is not Jonathan, anyone in particular.
That is right. That could be every man in terms of some of the men that we work with here. This dimension that we're on today is all about some things that we can think about in terms of having healthy relationship, and that so often it is the case that we say that sexual addiction and sexual infidelity is a false solution to our desires for intimacy. It's a false intimacy in a certain way. And I think one of the lines there at the end of that story was that, his soul was yearning for a deeper connection. And I think that that's true for all the men, even if, what they're doing is looking at pornography or pursuing other relationships outside of marriage. I think it's a deep longing for companionship.
Right. Well, I like you use a description in the workbook of intimacy, and what you say is intimacy is the state of honesty and mutual acceptance between two or more people. Being intimate requires the ability to be honest about yourself, what you think, and what you've done.
Yeah, honesty is a key to intimacy. One of the other words that we sometimes use with intimacy is the word vulnerability. It's the ability to take a risk that if you tell someone what you're really feeling, thinking, or doing, that person will react negatively, and you'll perhaps wind up all alone. In fact, the first unit in the section on this in the workbook is about some of the false core beliefs that we have that leads to another term we oftentimes use called intimacy disorder. And, the four classic core beliefs in the field of sex addiction are applicable here. They are, I'm a bad and worthless person. No, that's number one. Number two, no one will love me as I am. If you knew me, in other words, you'd hate me and leave me. Number three, no one takes care of my needs but me. Just stop with those three for the moment, and you'll see inherent in those three is a profound intimacy disorder, so that if I truly have the core belief that if you really knew me, you'd hate me and leave me, then that's going to produce lots of lies, lots of deception. I'm not going to tell you what I'm really doing, not going to tell you what I'm really thinking, because my belief is that if you knew all of that stuff, you'd hate me and leave me. And there's a profound anxiety to intimacy disorder. There's in a way, a fear of honesty in relationship, because you just don't have that sense of trust developed that you can screw up and make mistakes, and someone else will still love you.
Aren't all of these tied to the byproduct then, or the byproduct of those emotions of shame?
Yeah, basically what we're talking about there, particularly with those core beliefs, is shame, which, the first core belief there, I'm a bad and worthless person, that's basically the essence of shame.
Well, let's get back to our look here as we're studying our series on healthy sexuality. And when we left, you were talking about the first three core beliefs about shame, and this is all a part of our relational dimension.
there are lessons that are in the workbook. There are 5 lessons, and 2 of the 5 in this particular section on healthy intimacy cover what intimacy is all about. One of the great things that was part of our early healing journey and her early heritage in our field was working with Dr. Patrick Carnes. In those early days, he came up with a intimacy scale, meaning he broke intimacy down into about 7 or 8 different categories.
Initiative, presence, finish, the ability to finish something, vulnerability, nurture, honesty, play.
Now, basically, what happens in the workbook is that we talk about if you've got healthy intimacy, you initiate things, you're proactive, so often. Just last night in one of our groups, the guys were saying that when I come home at the end of the day, my wives are just longing for me to talk to them. And we know how that goes. We've had a long day. We've been around people all day. We don't necessarily want to have one more conversation. We know we need to get home. We need to relax and whatever. But I think some point after that segue happens when you get home, the guy that's practicing healthy intimacy will initiate conversation with his wife later on in the evening. Maybe the kids are in bed, and he'll ask for a check-in. In that conversation, hopefully he'll be vulnerable. He'll be able to talk honestly about what he's feeling, what he's been doing, and all those kind of things. So therefore, he's honest. The finish thing is really interesting in that it has to do with the idea that we leave things unsolved or unfinished. Maybe, whether it's projects around the house or conversations, we never finish anything. Part of the interesting part of that is we have a hard time saying goodbye or letting go of something.
Well, when you said earlier, now one of these points is presence.
Right.
And presence is kind of tied to that first initiative one, like you're saying, returning from work, not necessarily longing for an involved conversation, but the ability for you to be present for your wife, to be able to listen to what she has to say, because you haven't been together all day long. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's right. So to be present is to be in the room. I mean, so many of the guys that we work with here have an ability to be other places, in their mind. They sometimes dissociate. They sometimes are fantasizing. They sometimes are just distracted with television or other things. In other words, how many of you have had that experience of you're watching TV and your wife comes in the room and she wants to have a conversation? Well, thankfully these days with VCRs and whatever else we have, we can pause something, and I would suggest that you do pause and you do focus and you do have presence. Now, we think one of the qualities of healthy intimacy is just the ability to also kind of think about scheduling time. So if you get home at the end of the day and your wife says, "I'd like to talk," or I need to connect with you, you might say, I need a few minutes to kind of decompress or unwind, but I would be willing to come back to this later. And then if you have initiative, you will follow through with that. You will be present, you will be honest, you will be vulnerable, and you've initiated that conversation. I think a lot of people would be willing to delay a conversation if they had faith and trust that a person was willing to initiate it at a later time.
Well, and the nurture component would build upon you pausing that DVR and showing the willingness to listen to what others have to say without there needing to be something for you that's in it.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. So one of the dimensions here in healthy intimacy that I find the most intriguing and sometimes the most difficult is, one of the dimensions that's listed here is play, the ability to play and have fun. Intimacy is about joy. It's about, exciting things. At our couples workshop that we do here at the center, we just had one last weekend. On the Friday night of that workshop, they actually have an assignment, and that assignment is to figure out something to do to play. And you should see the looks on their faces when we give, we thought we were coming to a workshop. I mean, this is work, and this is not play. And we say, but play is about joy, creativity, spontaneity. some of the hallmarks of intimacy, really, that a relationship should be fun. It's we don't need to just work at relationship. We need to play at relationship. And if you have any problems knowing how to play, many of you listening have consultants at home on this, otherwise known as your children. So, so figure it out.
Figure it out. Well, and closely tied to all this, I've always been a huge fan of the positive effects of laughter.
Right.
And the importance of how important laughter is to our daily life, in our demeanor, in our frame of mind, in the endorphins that are released through laughter. And that, to me, feels like it's closely tied to the importance of play.
When we went through this exercise at the workshop we did with Pat Carnes, at one point, Debbie and I obviously were being very serious about this, and there was a hill next door to the center where we were doing this workshop, and Pat Carnes just told us to go to the top of the hill and roll down the hill together. I hadn't thought about that since I was like 3 years old, I guess, and we did wind up doing that. And when we got to the bottom of the hill, we were both laughing so hard it wasn't even funny.
Right.
Well, it was funny, I guess.
Yeah.
So, but that kind of relaxed us and reminded us that we were little kids at heart. We enjoyed each other. And those are all important intimacy skills, enjoying each other, enjoying being with each other, having fun, those kinds of things.
I don't want us to overlook one of the other principles that we listed a few minutes ago when we rattled these all off, and that's the importance of honesty.
Honesty. Well, that goes back to the vulnerability. And, basically when particularly the addicts that we work with are in recovery, they've got to practice getting honest, meaning they've got to be around safe people and they've got to take risks to tell their story. And it takes practice. Actually, later on in this whole section on healthy relationship, there's a unit on restoring trust. Getting honest is one of the critical elements of that.
Well, isn't it true that unhealthy intimacy is dishonest?
Yeah, that would be true.
Yeah.
It would be basically you're guilty of false advertising because you are not actually representing who you really are.
Right. Well, as usual, the show is flying by on us here. So as we have just the last few minutes, how would you summarize this section that we're addressing today?
Well, the next unit is about healthy dependency, and sometimes we use words in our field like codependency. And we've talked about this before on the show, but let me just remind the listeners that healthy dependency is based on your motivation for doing anything for anybody. If your motivation for doing something for somebody else is fear, anxiety. In other words, if I don't do this, if I don't do it right, if I don't do it the way he or she wants, then bad things are going to happen. So if your motivation for any of your interactions in a relationship are based on anxiety and fear, that's going to lead to codependency. In other words, I'm just afraid of the other person leaving me. If your motivation is based on serving and loving, regardless of the results, then that would be healthy dependency. So we covered that, and basically in both of those two lessons in this section, we give you some characteristics of it that you can look at and kind of evaluate yourself. And Debbie and I have always found that it leads to healthy conversations. One of the lessons in this unit is about contracts. We don't have time to get into all the contracts, but we were just talking about play. One of the things that Debbie and I did early on in our recovery was we had a date night contract, and it was basically come hell or high water on a Friday night, we were going to go out. And we actually engaged a babysitter at one point. We just contracted with her to be there every Friday night, and we were going to pay her whether we used her or not. So, neither one of us is willing to spend money that it doesn't have
hasn't
any value,
been earned.
That
right.
hasn't been earned. So, it kind of forced us to think and be creative. That was one of the contracts. Another contract that Debbie and I had early on was what we called back in those days the fighting contract. Today we call it the safe conversation contract. And most couples can realize that there are certain times, places, and conditions that their conversations become unsafe. And so, the unit helps you to set up some of the contractually agreed upon provisions of safe conversation. We won't talk after 10 o'clock because we know we're both too tired. We won't use profanity. We won't use you statements. We know that in certain places, like in front of the kids, conversations, we want them to be safe. These contracts are actually kind of practical, and the value of a contract is, and this is one of the things that I wanted to encourage today, is that just as we tell the men that we work with here to have accountability, and Debbie tells the wives to have accountability in their lives to be on their healing journey, I think couples also need other couples, other people in their life that are holding them accountable to some of the contracts that they've established with each other for conversation, for play, for safe conversation, those kinds of things. I think it's all right to look at it as a matter of developing discipline, and accountability is a part of that. I will tell you that of this entire workbook, the page that is quoted the most to me is page 75. And that is about restoring trust. That is the question that is one of our most frequently asked questions here. Back in those days, I must have been in some place where I was trying to imitate one of the great preachers of all time, Peter Marshall. And Debbie and I had seen the movie A Man Called Peter and read the book A Man Called Peter. And actually, Peter Marshall's son was in seminary with me. So he was a great Scottish preacher, and he was a great at alliteration. So when I thought about the main points in restoring trust, I had them all start with the letter C. We don't have time today to go over all of them. We've, in effect, covered a lot of it. But one of the things about restoring trust is consistently being honest, consistently telling the truth, consistently being vulnerable. That includes, disclosing, all information about me and my past and that kind of thing. Debbie calls it now closing the door. That's another C, that, our commitment to the relationship is, ongoing, and that we are not going to abandon each other, threaten divorce, and those kinds of things. We're aware that this half-hour show is way too short. We've got way too much material here. If you're interested in this, we can certainly, through email or conversation or attendance at one of our workshops, we're going to educate you about all of these kind of things we've been talking about today. So we hope we've simply whetted your appetite to look at this some more.
Thank you for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast. You've been listening to Dr. Mark Laaser present a legacy podcast in which we continued our series on healthy sexuality. Today, Mark spoke about the relational dimension. We hope that this episode has been beneficial to you, and we hope that you'll visit our website, faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll get lots of resources and information that will be helpful to you on your healing journey. We hope that you can visit our website, and there you will find resources that will be helpful to you. And we appreciate you taking the time to visit our website and to learn from all that we have to offer there. We also have the online information and registration for our 3-day intensive workshops, the Men's Journey Workshop, the Women's Journey Workshop, and the 2 different Couples Journey Workshops. Check those all out at faithfulandtrue.com. In the meantime, we hope this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.